All right, thank you, counsel.
I'll rephrase, Your Honor.
And thank you, Mr. Blazer, for finding that in your database. Rephrase the question, please.
Thank you. Sir, in this case, testimony was presented that as of 9:45 on the night of June the 12th, 1994, the defendant was wearing dark blue or black like cotton type sweatsuit. And then the question I posed to you earlier, you indicated that you did find fibers like that in some of the evidence that you collected in this case.
I did, yes.
And did you examine the actual items, the Rockingham glove, Ronald Goldman's shirt, and the defendant's socks?
I looked at debris that was removed from these items.
And did you also see the items themselves?
I did at some point, yes.
Your Honor, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Now, you have examined the crime scene photographs, some of them in this case, correct?
I have, yes.
Were you able to determine where on Mr. Goldman's shirt you found the blue-black cotton fiber?
No.
People's 167, Your Honor. The defendant's socks depicted in this photograph, sir, did you actually examine the items themselves?
I saw the socks at a later date, yes.
Were you able to determine where on the socks the blue-black cotton fiber was found?
No.
Can you tell us, sir, what conclusion you reached concerning the blue-black cotton fibers found on the Rockingham glove, Ron Goldman's shirt, and the socks found in the defendant's bedroom?
Well, they all could have originated from the same fabric.
What appearance would those fibers have in a piece of fabric in terms of color?
They would be black. It would look black.
May I pull off the result?
All right, Ms. Clark, does that complete the items on that board?
I believe it does, Your Honor.
All right, then I'd ask you to bring it down to this end of the jury box because it's hard to see the detail.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joe. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Deedrick, did you have a photo board prepared to demonstrate to the jury the blue-black cotton fibers that you were able to match, that you found on Ron Goldman's shirt, that you found to be
Excuse me.
consistent on Ron
Right.
Goldman's shirt?
I object and ask to approach.
No. It's been rephrased. Proceed.
The blue-black cotton fibers that you found to be consistent with each other, exhibited the same microscopic characteristics that you found on Ron Goldman's shirt, on the defendant's socks, and on the Rockingham glove.
Yes, I did prepare a board.
Asked to mark this as People's
47.
487. Thank you.
Mrs. Clark.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind stepping down with a pointer to explain to us what we see on this board.
Okay, the board consists of 8 photographs, the top 3 being from the Rockingham glove on the left, Ron Goldman's shirt in the middle and from the socks from the defendant's residence. The numbers, we have our Q3B in the laboratory, which refers to the Rockingham glove, Q23 from Ron Goldman's shirt, and Q27, which would have been our item number for the socks. The photographs that you see, these would be the cotton fibers, the dark ones with the blue accents or portions of the fiber that are blue. The brownish fibers in the background would be from the cashmere. That's the lining fibers. Q23, that's a clump of fiber here from Ron Goldman's shirt, and this is a fiber from the socks from the defendant. The next three photographs depict, again, another photograph from the Rockingham glove fiber, a fiber from Ron Goldman's shirt, and another fiber that was removed from the defendant's socks. The bottom two photographs, another fiber here which appears to have blood on the surface from the Rockingham glove, and another fiber located next to a hair that hair was like the hairs of Nicole Brown, and that's one of the fibers that was lying next to it.
So Q23 at the bottom here of this chart actually shows a hair that you determined to be consistent with those of Nicole Brown associated with one of the blue-black cotton fibers that you determined to be consistent with those found on the defendant's socks and the Rockingham glove?
That's right. They're right. All from the same item, and there were, again, I said before, there were a number of hairs that were found on Ron Goldman's shirt.
But, you know, on object and move to strike the statement all from the same item.
Overruled.
And this Q23 that was taken off that was found on Ron Goldman's shirt?
That's right. Yeah, all three center photographs were photographs of the fibers recovered from Ron Goldman's shirt.
Can you tell us, sir, what this blue-black cotton fiber, this would have been a natural fiber, correct?
Natural plant fiber.
And what method of comparison or examinations did you use with respect to those blue-black cotton fibers?
Well, the fibers are compared microscopically with a comparison microscope. They're also compared with fluorescence, microspectrophotometry by the color. So the color is compared as well instrumentally. That would be the methods that were employed.
Now, given what you said earlier about fibers and the fact that they come and go, what is significant to you about this blue-black cotton fiber that you found on the three different items of evidence in this case?
Object to the former.
Overruled.
Okay, I stated previously that fibers don't persist a long time, and routinely the fibers that you find on an item often reflect the last contacts that may have occurred with that item. The blood associated, or what appears to be blood associated with the Rockingham glove fiber probably caused the fiber to adhere. So that appears to be a contiguous or an event that's happening about the same time. Fiber coming in contact with the blood, it sticks to the glove, and that's how we end up finding it. The shirt fibers are the same thing. Any fibers that you find on an item of clothing, at least within a certain number of fibers that you find, again, may reflect a recent contact. I mean, there's no absolutes here, but you do find that recent contacts often result in fibers that you find. The clump of fibers here associated with the cashmere-like fibers that you see on the upper left, again, it's a clump of fibers. It's a group of fibers that are found, as opposed to just a loose fragment.
A clump?
Well, it appears to be a clump. Excuse me. A clump. There's actually a group of fiber here, maybe two or possibly even three fibers in this particular region.
On the Rockingham glove?
The same with Ron Goldman's shirt here. It's another clump, which may have been just a loose clump of fibers that we often find on our clothes. A tuft of fibers.
Now, you saw a lot of fibers in this case, correct?
A lot, yes.
Was there something unusual about these particular blue-black cotton fibers that drew your attention or made you pay particular attention to them?
Yes. Well, cotton fibers in themselves they're common. There's a lot of cotton fibers out there. What gives cotton fibers significance is that when you add color to them in a specific way, some you see more, maybe less likely than others. These are actually, it's a real dark blue. It looks black, but in some areas the dye was not absorbed the same. And this may be where the yarns are attached to the fabric. The same thing appeared also on the fibers that were recovered from Ron Goldman's shirt. The bluish area also present here that was recovered from the defendant's socks. The bluish area here is starting to show. Some of these areas can better be shown using instrumental techniques with color, because the eyeball sees this as a shade of blue, this as a shade of blue, and so forth. The instrument, the microspectrophotometer, can actually break down this color into its components, and you compare then the absorption spectra, which is an assistance to the eye comparison.
I think it was sometime last week that we marked some charts that had wave patterns showing the light absorption.
That's right.
And then you, I think, indicated that that was a method you could use to compare fibers to one another to see if they could have had a common source.
Right. It's a tool that's used to help the examiner make a decision on whether or not the fibers are alike or different.
And that was that method used with respect to the blue-black cotton fibers in this case?
It was, yes.
And a chart was generated?
I think there were several charts generated, yes.
And what did those charts indicate?
Well, it indicated to me that the absorption spectra were the same. That is, the dye components that are present that make up the color that we see are the same. It still doesn't say they all came from the same fabric. You have to understand that. All it says is that they appear to exhibit similar properties, both instrumentally and visually.
Did you prepare another chart of photographs pertaining to this blue-black cotton fiber?
Yes, I did.
It has 3 photographs on it, and it shows the known cotton fiber from Goldman's jeans on the left-hand side as you face it, and 2 other photographs concerning the blue-black cotton fiber. I asked that it be marked People's
488.
488. And if I could ask Jonathan to hold it for the brief period of questioning for Mr. Deedrick.
All right, that's Mr. Fairwell.
Yeah, no, I meant for Mr. Deedrick. Thank you, Mr. Fairwell. Oh, I said John, thank you. So, can you please describe to us what you have attempted to depict on this chart that's been marked as People's 488?
A couple of things here. One, just to give you an idea what the blue jean cotton fibers look like. The blue jean cotton fibers, you see areas where the dye is absorbed some lighter than others, and the more fading that you get with blue jeans, the color just leaches out. You also see some white. Even though they look blue, there's actually white fibers that are mixed in there with it. But the purpose of showing you this photograph was to show you the difference between this particular fiber and this particular fiber down here that are also cotton, but they're colored differently.
For the record, when he said this particular item and this particular item, he was referring to the photographs labeled as Q23.
Yes.
Now, both of the photographs you see on the right-hand side of the chart were fibers that were recovered from Ron Goldman's shirt. The one in particular at the top right, you can see how closely associated it is with a hair that exhibited the same characteristics as Nicole Brown. In fact, it somehow wrapped itself around the hair.
Mr. Deedrick, let me ask you a real quick question here. This item Q23 on this chart that was recovered from the shirt of Ronald Goldman shows the blue-black cotton fiber wrapped around the hair that you describe as being consistent with those of Nicole Brown. How could it have become wrapped around in that manner?
Well, the hair has to actually roll. It has to roll across the fiber. Either that fiber is a loose fiber, and it happened just to land on it and rolled over it, or the hair rolled on fabric. if the hair rolls on a fabric surface that is comprised of these fibers, there's a good chance that hair, depending on what type of material is on the hair, may actually cause a roll effect, and the fiber will roll right around the hair. And that's how it ended up in that state.
Do you have an opinion as to how it occurred in this particular case?
Now, it's difficult to know exactly how that fiber got there. Perhaps, again, the two methods I mentioned, one being maybe a little more likely than the other. If it actually landed on the fiber and rolled, that would be less likely, in my opinion, than if it actually came in contact with the fabric, which would be a more likely event.
So, for example, if the defendant wearing a dark cotton sweatsuit that had fibers like those you've described here in these charts, the blue-black cotton fibers, and he attacked Nicole Brown with his sleeve coming into contact with her hair, could that account for the manner in which you find the fabric wrapped around hair like those of Nicole Brown?
It's possible that could have happened that way. Sweatsuits tend to have, because of their plush nature, tend to have longer, looser fibers on the surface.
Now, the bottom photograph here, is that another area of the same hair and fiber depicted in the upper photograph?
I don't believe so, no. That's another fiber.
Another blue-black fiber on Ron Goldman's shirt?
Right. There were a number of fibers, I don't recall the exact number, that were found on Ron Goldman's shirt.
And just above it, is that a hair above it there?
Yes, and that again, I had 35 hairs, remember, off of the shirt that were like Nicole Brown's on Ron Goldman's shirt. And these are on those slides, same slides.
So is this hair depicted in the lower photograph next to the blue-black cotton fiber also consistent with the hairs of Nicole Brown?
Again, I believe that hair is. Again, I'm only going by a fuzzy photograph here, but a lot of the fibers and hairs were in close proximity. I'm not implying, and I don't want to imply in this instance here, that this fiber is like this fiber in the sense of how it's oriented. It just happens to be laying right next to the hair.
All right, juror number 7, can you see this exhibit?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Could we take this chart down to the end, Your Honor? Mr. Fairclough, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Furlow. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Escobar is assisting me. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Now, sir, we spoke earlier about it being common to find fibers of one item of clothing on another item of clothing worn at the same time by the same person. You recall that?
I do.
And I think you discussed it in the context of having found fibers from Ron Goldman's shirt, or fibers consistent with Ron Goldman's shirt on his jeans.
Right.
Okay. The blue-black cotton fiber that you've just described as having been found on the defendant's socks, what reasonably, logically can you infer about how that fiber came to be transferred onto the defendant's socks based on your expertise?
Objection, Inspector.
Sustained.
All right, is the finding of the blue-black cotton fiber you found on the defendant's socks consistent with the defendant having worn an item of clothing made of such blue-black cotton fibers at the time he wore the socks?
Objection, Inspector Lee.
Orwell.
It's certainly not inconsistent with it, right? He could have come in contact with an outfit. That's how the fibers got there, or some other way.
And what other way would that be?
Walk down the fiber.
Sustained.
Okay. You also found the blue-black cotton fibers on the Rockingham glove. Is that finding consistent with the defendant having worn a dark blue to black cotton sweatsuit at the time he wore that glove?
Sustained.
How many fibers of the blue-black cotton fibers did you find on the Rockingham glove?
I don't recall. I believe there were several.
And if the defendant were wearing a dark blue-black cotton sweatsuit at the time he wore the Rockingham glove, would that account for the transfer of those fibers, the blue-black cotton fibers, onto that glove where you found them?
Sustained.
Is the finding of the blue-black cotton fibers on the Rockingham glove consistent with the same phenomenon you described earlier when you testified that you found fibers consistent with Ron Goldman's shirt on his jeans?
No, that would be the same if you're assuming then that the individual who wore the gloves also had the dark sweatsuit on at the same time. The same principles are taking place. That is, in the process of wearing an item of clothing, loose fibers are going to be present. Making contact with that item of clothing with the glove or whatever could result in a transfer, yes.
All right, counsel, I think we've gone over the manner in which fibers and hairs are transferred now about 8 times.
Okay, let me just ask you this then, sir. Given all that you've told us about fibers and the manner in which they're transferred and how easily they're moved and lost, what is the significance of your findings concerning the blue-black cotton fibers, which exhibit the same microscopic characteristics, on 3 different pieces of evidence? One at Rockingham, the Rockingham glove, defendant's socks, and Ron Goldman's shirt.
Objection, speculation, compound.
Sustained. You can form an opinion as to any possible relationship between the 3.
What, if any, opinion do you have concerning the significance of your finding the blue-black cotton fiber on the defendant's socks, on the Rockingham glove, and on Ron Goldman's shirt?
Sustained. Rephrase the question. Is there a relationship between the 3?
I understand. What opinion, sir, do you have as to the relationship of the 5 blue-black cotton fibers you found on the defendant's socks, the Rockingham glove, and Ron Goldman's shirt?
Overruled.
I've previously stated that persistence is a phenomenon that's very important here, as well as how fibers can be transferred. The fibers that you find on a particular item of clothing often reflect last contacts. If all 3 items have fibers that are alike microscopically, that would suggest that all 3 items had last physical contact with an item of clothing that had exactly the same fibers in it. It could be one item. I'm not saying it is, but it could be one item of clothing.
And the blue-black, how many blue-black cotton fibers did you find on Ron Goldman's shirt?
There were more. There were a number of fibers. Again, I don't have an exact count on that. Population was greater.
Does the presence of that number of fibers found on Ron Goldman's shirt indicate to you, what does it indicate to you with respect to the manner in which it could have been transferred to that shirt?
Sustained.
Does the number of those blue-black cotton fibers found on Ron Goldman's shirt indicate there was some contact between Ron Goldman's shirt and someone wearing a fabric comprised of that kind of fiber?
Leading counsel.
Same question.
We've established the transfer and all of that.
Does the number of fibers found on Ron Goldman's shirt of the blue-black cotton variety indicate anything of significance to you with respect to the nature of the contact that transferred them to his shirt?
Objection. Same question.
Overrule.
The more rigorous the contact, the longer the duration, the more forceful contact often results in greater fiber exchanges up to a certain point. Again, it just depends on the nature of the fibers, it depends on the nature of the contact, but the greater force, the more surface area coming into actual physical contact, and this is common sense kind of, but they show this through studies, that you'll transfer more fibers that way. Just like if you walk through the mud, the more you walk through the mud, you get more mud on you. It's kind of all the same principle.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Mr. Bailey.
Good afternoon, Mr. Deedrick, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Deedrick, do you prefer to be called Agent Deedrick or Mr. Deedrick?
Oh, Mr. Deedrick's fine.
Okay, that's what we'll use then. You have testified, I believe, that you have handled about 4,000 cases, as you sit here, since becoming a hair and fiber examiner at the FBI laboratory.
That's right.
Can you tell me when it was that you first went over the 1,000 mark? At what point in your career?
I don't even recall. It was some time ago.
Well, do you do any kind of annual reports that indicate what your activity has been during a calendar year?
I believe those records are kept, yes.
Well, can you tell me approximately how many cases you have done per year since you became an examiner?
Well, probably the average was around 30 cases plus probably per month. So over 300 cases per year, probably on a average.
Okay. Is that pretty consistent from year to year, or does it vary greatly?
Oh, it was pretty consistent there for a long time.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, your duties have changed twice, I believe, since you became an examiner. First, you became in charge of training sometime in the 80s.
Well, I had that actually was just an added duty. It didn't detract from my caseload. I still got plenty of cases to work.
All right. So
Then I
your
be-
handling of cases remained consistent
Remained
despite that additional
right.
chore.
It remained pretty consistent.
Excuse me, gentlemen, you're both going to have to allow the other to finish speaking.
No, sorry.
How about when you became section chief? Did that alter your work routine at all?
After I was officially assigned as unit chief in Hairs and Fibers, yes, my caseload dropped. So I don't handle many cases anymore.
How are cases distributed among the examiners who work in your section?
Well, they're distributed on the basis of expertise, length of service, how quickly they can turn a case around, type of examiner they are. It depends upon the individual. Cases are assigned based on those reasons.
And who do they come to initially within the section?
Well, they come into the unit chief or acting unit chief, and that person then will assign the cases to a specific examiner to look at.
Does that mean if you are present, you'll do the assignments, and if you are not, you have a deputy who carries out that function?
That's right.
Who would that be?
Well, Robert Fram is the next one in line as far as time in the unit. He's got about 6 or 7 years, and I normally have him do it, but it could be any other individual in the unit who's an examiner, qualified examiner.
Is this a case that you assigned to yourself when it arrived in Washington?
No, I did not.
How did that happen?
Well, the section chief, James Kearney, asked me to work it when it came into the laboratory.
And is he, for all intents and purposes, your boss,
Right, he's my immediate supervisor.
the person to whom you report?
That's right.
Okay. Let me ask you a few questions about your background, Mr. Deedrick. Have you written any papers for journals connected to the profession of forensic science?
I've written a couple articles regarding feather identification, but nothing regarding hair and fiber.
You were trained in feathers by a lady from North Carolina who specializes in that,
And that's right.
and that's the comparison of feathers, knowns and unknowns, as you have described it here, relating to hairs.
Right, as well as identifications.
Is that part of the FBI Academy's training program now?
Well, I like to teach all the new people a little bit about it, just so they expose them to it as a potential type of evidence they may encounter.
Have you written a paper in an FBI publication having to do with determining sex from the examination of fibers?
I have. I guess I was a co-author on that regarding sex determination of forcibly removed human hairs, yes.
Any other publications that you have authored?
I don't believe so.
How about any books? Have you written any books on this subject?
No.
Are there any associations or professional societies devoted strictly to hair and fiber experts?
Well, there are a couple organizations that have been established over the past few years that deal specifically with fiber identifications and fiber examinations. There's a European Fibers Group, and there's also the Technical Working Group for Fiber Examiners in the United States. But for the most part, most scientific associations deal with all the various phases of forensics, none specifically dedicated to hair and fiber that I know of.
What would you say is the leading association of forensic scientists in this country?
Oh, probably the American Academy of Forensic Science.
Are you a member of that?
I am not.
Have you ever held an office in it?
Well, not in a scientific organization, no.
Do you belong to any organization?
I do not.
Have you ever written any publications for the Journal of the Academy of Forensic Science, known as the Journal of Forensic Science?
I don't believe I have, no.
What publications do you regularly read that track the developments in this area of the profession?
Well, we have a Forensic Science Information Resource Center in the laboratory that sort of tracks all the different documents and articles and journals that are published on a monthly basis, either in the American Academy of Forensic Science, which is the Journal of Forensic Science. It used to be the Journal of Forensic Science Society, and there are a number of other forensic journals that come through. The Microscope by the McCrone Institute, and there are also other forensic publications, books that come out, Forensic Science Handbook, and others that we refer to periodically.
Which of these, if any, do you review on a regular basis when the articles pertain to your specialty?
Well, all of the Journal of Forensic Science articles that come out are circulated, as well as, again, I don't recall what the new name for the Forensic Science Society is in England, but all of those come through on a routine basis.
Are these things that you read when they appear to pertain to hairs and fibers?
Yes.
Okay. Is this a matter of routine when these articles come out and they arrive at the laboratory, you'll review them?
I try to keep up with them, yes, sir.
And have you reviewed any number of studies that have been published, for instance, in the Journal of Forensic Science?
I've read quite a few, yes.
Okay. Can you tell me what would be the average number of pieces of materials that would be involved in a case as such? This being a case.
Right. Oh, an average case may be 10 to 20 items, perhaps, an average.
You recall testifying earlier that maybe hundreds, 100 or more pieces in a case?
Right, could. I mean, I've had cases with thousands of items, but if you took all of the cases across the board and did an average on all of the cases, we get a lot of cases that are pretty small. So it's probably 10 to 20.
Okay.
20 might sound probably correct.
And what is the work routine in your laboratory? How many days a week are you there when you're not traveling?
Yeah, the normal workday is, it's 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and it's a 10-hour day for all the examiners. So it's supposed to be 9 to 5:30. We get in about 6:40 in the morning and close up shop around 5:30.
What percentage of a 10-hour day would you say you spend at the comparison microscope on an average day?
Well, each examiner has a little different method depending on how they work. Some people are morning people and some people are afternoon people. I've always been a morning person in terms of looking through the microscope. So I'll spend perhaps from 7 o'clock to noon steady doing microscope work. And after that point, I find that my eyes get tired because it's a strain. And I do mostly administrative work, reading, and try to do some miscellaneous work. But the heavy scope work is morning.
So I guess what you're telling us is that when you are in the laboratory, you probably average 5 hours a day at the comparison microscope looking at various materials known and
Right.
unknown.
Probably steady, heavy comparison microscope work about 5 hours a day.
And how many weeks a year are you permitted on vacation?
Well, let's see, I accumulated up to the maximum. I probably get 26 days a year.
That you take?
Well, if I can, yes. I may have to give some up this year.
Is it fair to say that you probably work, taking out weekends, holidays, and so forth, about 250 days a year?
Yeah, I've never really thought about that, but there are a number of days that we get off, yes, with holidays and weekends. So.
And vacation?
And if you can get a vacation in there, yes, that's right.
Oh, well, does that sound a reasonable number?
Sure, that sounds fine.
Okay. When you testify in a case, you necessarily spend some time in preparation with the lawyers and others who have called you and asked you to appear, correct?
Sometimes you do, and yes, it's a good idea, right, to spend some time.
Well, has anybody ever put you on the witness stand without talking to you about what you were going to say?
It's happened a lot, yes.
You just get called in the door, introduced to the lawyer, and pile on the stand? Is that it?
Right, it's a little uncomfortable.
That didn't happen in this case, though, did it?
No, I had a chance to discuss the case, yes.
You spent quite a bit of time in the preparation for your testimony in this case, have you not?
I came out a couple times, yes.
Okay. Would you give us, including travel time, an estimate of the number of hours that you have spent getting ready to testify here in this case?
Stay, rephrase the question.
Okay. First, give me the number of hours that you've spent preparing. And if that includes some of the time you were on the airplane, please include that too, assuming that you are flying back and forth.
Yeah, flying, yes, sir.
Okay.
I probably spent a good 10 days, or maybe a little less than 10 days, in direct contact with the prosecutor, with the DA's office, in preparation for the case. As far as office time preparation, it took a while to prepare some photographs and also to have the charts made by the special projects section. It's difficult to say, but there's been quite a bit of time in preparation for this case.
Okay. And can you translate that into an approximate number of hours?
I don't believe I can.
Several hundred?
I really don't know. 100, couple hundred, maybe so.
Okay. Can you tell me the average length of time involved away from your facility when you testify in a case? And I mean just the average.
Yeah. Well, an average testimony, you'll probably go out the day before, testify, and I try to get back that same day of the testimony. So one day out, overnight. So 2 days.
All right. But if the case is some distance away, such as this coast or Alaska, it may be considerably longer than that.
Might be a week. Might be.
Would you say that the average that you spend when you have to testify in a case, including your preparation, your appearance in court, and whatever waiting around you have to do for whatever reason while the trial is in progress, would average 2 days perhaps?
2 days is a good average, I think, for a testimony to travel and testify.
So, with the 400 cases in which you've testified prior to coming here, it would be 800 days that you were not present in the laboratory.
Oh, I don't know if that's the average or not, but I mean, when you consider a lot of testimonies are non-travel testimonies, a lot of them are in the District of Columbia, so it's just walk down the street and testify. I've testified in Fairfax County a few times. I consider testimonies depositions. We get a lot of depositions. People travel to Washington, take a deposition. So I included those, not just travel testimonies.
These were not trials, then, as you said before. Some were merely the giving of a deposition.
I would have included depositions,
Well.
right, regarding testimony.
Can you give us any help there as between the times you gave a deposition and the times you appeared before a judge in a courtroom, with or without a jury?
Probably 50 or so depositions, maybe, over the years.
That leaves 350 trials.
It's quite a few.
Now, a few moments ago, you thought it quite reasonable to estimate that the average testimony was a 2-day affair. Do you wish to change that?
No, that sounds fair.
Okay.
Couple
If that
days.
is so, 400 testimonies would be 800 days.
Well, that's correct.
Okay. And none of these generally take place on weekends or holidays, correct?
Well, I have, the testimonies, I have testified on Saturday. I have testified on holidays.
How many times?
Well,
Who are these
probably
judges?
10, probably 10 times or 15 times. But yeah, that's a rare event.
Okay. You alluded to the exhibits that were obviously prepared for the case of people against O.J. Simpson. Is it fair to say that this is a rather larger number of exhibits than you normally use in a criminal case?
Oh, yes. Yeah, in a regular criminal case.
Is it fair to say that it is probably the largest number of exhibits that you have prepared for your testimony in a criminal case?
It could be at the record level, yes.
Normally, you don't bring anything this elaborate to the courtroom with you, do you?
Well, that's not true. Normally, I don't think that's correct. On any time that I make a fiber association anymore, even hairs I'll be photographing. It's not something we used to do years ago, but I felt this to be quite beneficial as far as being able to show what I look at and what I associate. It's very common for me and for the unit to go out on a trial and take charts of any associations, but not often do we have this many associations.
Are those charts in other cases generally made up for that case, or are they generic and illustrative, such as you'd use for teaching?
No, well, both. Some make up charts for training purposes, education, and a lot of the others are prepared from fiber associations or hair associations.
In how many of your cases have you made up boards of random hairs, known hairs, etc., similar to those which you have used here?
Well, I've done this before in a couple major homicide investigations in the state of Virginia and in Alaska. I used boards in those 2 cases, and there may have been a couple others.
You're talking about the Hughes case in Virginia?
Right.
Caleb
Hughes, that's correct.
Is it a fair statement, based on your extensive experience within the FBI, that the Bureau takes a good deal of pride in the quality of its work?
Oh,
Sure.
And that would be true of each section, would it not?
We try to hire the best people and try to train them as best we can and hope that they put out a good work product.
And you like to show, particularly since you become section chief, a good level of performance among those working under you, do you not?
Sure. We like to think that they're doing their job like we expect them to.
I understood you to explain on direct examination that your examiners are subjected about twice a year to blind internal testing.
Well, they're not blind. They're internal proficiency tests.
Is
Right.
the examiner aware that he's being tested?
Yes,
Oh. So he's told in advance, this is a test,
that's right.
as you would be if you were in school or college or law school.
This is a test. That's right.
Are these tests that you have designed over the past 15 years or so?
No. No, the proficiency tests are routinely prepared by the unit chief or a designee. I have not been involved in preparing proficiency tests except for the past couple years.
Since you became the unit chief?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. Now, did I understand you to say that all the examiners pass all of the tests all of the time?
Well, in 1986 it started, and then going back through all the records, there hasn't been a problem since 1986, so.
Well, Mr. Deedrick, if you test a class and everybody gets 100, what does that tell you?
Sustain.
In a properly difficult test, would you not expect that there would be some misses?
Well, I think they're properly difficult enough. The tests are designed in such a way to simulate actual casework type experience. That is, questionnaires are recovered at a crime scene, known hair standards are submitted. The question is, could any of these questionnaires have originated from any of the known standards? And many of the tests are designed that way, and it's up to the examiner to make a decision as to whether they exhibit the same characteristics or not, based on their experience.
Do you follow reports of other kinds of tests that are taken or given to other groups of experts in your specialty?
Well, I have helped the collaborative testing services prepare tests for other crime laboratories where I've provided the test samples for them and prepared the test. But as far as hairs, there aren't a whole lot of hair tests that are submitted annually around the country.
What other crime laboratories have you visited that have specialty sections such as your own for doing hair and fiber examination and comparison?
Well, I've been here. I've been to Toronto. I've been...
Would Toronto be the RCMP?
No, it's the Met Lab. It's the city crime lab.
All right.
I've been to San Diego. Some of the major cities. I don't recall all of the different labs that I've been to. Some do several things. Some crime laboratories have a unit that may do trace and not just hairs and fibers. There are major crime labs in North Carolina, Florida, and also in New York that they may specialize in some hairs as well, hair and fiber, and not do other things.
Have you examined the standards in any of those facilities?
No, I've not gotten to that point yet where I've evaluated their testing standards.
Are you familiar with the methodologies that are used in laboratories other than your own?
I believe I am, yes.
Have you had any contact with the laboratory in the Connecticut State Police?
Yes, I have worked cases with them or for them over the years.
And you know Dr. Henry Lee?
I don't know him. I know of him, yes.
What about the RCMP in Canada? Do you follow any of the work that they do?
I have worked, or at least spoken with Barry Gaudet with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Crime Laboratory, and we don't have routine contact as to what they're doing or what we're doing. We may meet, the groups may meet at either symposia or American Academy meetings. But,
what about Interpol?
well, the English, again, the European group, European Fibers Group is a good way for different laboratories to discuss their techniques, their methodologies, and the studies that they're currently involved in. With regards to hairs, well, I'm not really sure how far they go in Europe with hair examinations. And for years, the English didn't do hair examinations. And after the mid-'80s, I believe they started working with hairs more.
Have you worked at all with Scotland Yard in England?
I have not, no, personally.
That would be the English counterpart of the FBI, would it not?
Well, I suspect so, yes.
And Interpol is a collage of countries joining together
Right.
for law enforcement and detection purposes, correct?
I believe you're correct,
Have
yes.
you been in their laboratories or talked with any of their examiners as to how they go about their duties?
No, I haven't.
You are familiar, of course, with a book written by John Hicks and published by the FBI in 1977 entitled Microscopy of Hair.
I am, yes.
Has that book been updated, revised, or in any way changed?
It hasn't changed, no.
Has the technology changed in any meaningful way since this book was published, to your knowledge?
Well, I think there have been some major advances in the examination of hairs beyond simple microscopy. We have done sex typing of forcibly removed human hairs. I don't believe there's anything in there on that. We have involved the analysis of tissue surrounding the root of forcibly removed hairs to do DNA testing. We're engaged in a research project right now and probably will implement this year the analysis of DNA sequencing of human hair shaft. So, yes, we have moved forward a little bit. We just haven't gotten around to revising that manual.
None of the techniques that you've just described were used in this case, were they?
No.
Okay. Have there not been efforts in the past to make more precise the comparison of human hairs?
There have been, yes.
Are you familiar with neutron activation analysis?
I am, yes.
When was that tried first, if you know?
Well, that could have been 60s or 70s. I'm not really sure when the technique was first applied. But it's a technique where the hair is exposed to radiation, and then by measuring the half-lives of the elements present in the hair shaft, it's possible then to determine what kind of elements are present. And it was a way that scientists thought that they could show that one person's hairs have these elements and another person's hairs have these elements, so that they're different and you can see differences. And the idea was if you associated a hair to an individual, they should have the same elements. And that was their purpose.
But the technique didn't work, did it?
No, it kind of fell flat. They haven't really pushed neutron activation analysis in years.
What about the ABO blood group determination from hair?
Well, the Japanese have had more success with ABO blood grouping of hairs than we have in the United States. Caucasians, there have been some problems with certain blood groups being very inconsistent. That is, by taking the hair, you could determine what the blood group was of the individual. But there have been some problems and the inconsistent results with, I believe, the A group, if I'm not mistaken. But the Japanese have had some success.
But this is not a technique that you use in your laboratory.
No, we don't.
It was not used in this case.
No, it wasn't.
What about the medullary index defined by Hausmann some years ago? Are you familiar with that?
Leon Augustus Hausmann, yes. Hausmann and others attempted to take measurements of hairs, such as how wide the medulla was in relationship to the thickness of the hair. And they were trying to determine if that was significant. That is, if you associated a hair, if the index was a certain number, then that was significant. Over the years, they've done a lot of things. They've tried a lot of different things to try to get away from having somebody tell you that I looked at these hairs and they look the same microscopically. They've all wanted some measurement. They want something that they can hold on to without ever having to look at a hair and say, these numbers are the same, so they must have come from the same person. But medullary index being one of those hasn't
Panned out, has
It
it?
hadn't panned out, no. It kind of fell flat.
Did you know Dr. Paul Leland Kirk?
No, I didn't. I read crime investigations of his and some of his other publications, but I never met him.
Do you remember the studies he conducted trying to see if the count of the number of scales in a hair shaft could be of significance
Right,
in
right.
identification.
He did scale count as well as refractive index testing, where he indicated that females have a certain refractive index in their hair and males have another one. And it was another way of distinguishing males and females based upon refractive index. And when I say refractive index, it's just how the hair interacts with the light. It's like fibers do the same thing. How they interact with light in a particular medium, how they bend the light or change the directionality of the light. But scale counts, medullary index, refractive index, none of those are used.
None of those have become part of the routine in examining hairs and fibers.
Well, believe it or not, all of those techniques, besides not neutron activation analysis, all of those are considered when the hairs are compared. That is, how much contrast the hair has in a mounted state, how big the scales are, how thick the medulla is. All of these things are looked at and evaluated, but we don't assign a number to them, and that's what they tried to do.
Now, I think you said that sex determination from hairs was something that had arisen since the publication of this book.
Well, for us it did, yes.
Could you explain why it is described in this book?
Well, I can't even recall exactly what they said about sex typing. Perhaps if you could read it to me.
Does the name Dr. Cecil Jacobson help you?
No.
Dr. Cecil Jacobson, page 26. George Washington University Medical School.
I don't know him.
Did you, in 1977, learn to determine sex from hairs?
No.
Okay. Do you do it today, without DNA, with something on the root?
No, we don't. And there's a reason for that because of the other information that can be derived through DNA.
Are you familiar with ion microprobe mass analysis?
Well, I've read something about it. I'm not an expert in that.
That fell the same way as neutron activation analysis, did it not?
Right. Most of the instrumental techniques never really got off the ground.
How about cross-section diagnosis? Are you familiar with such a technique?
Well, cross-sections are done. Optical cross-sectioning is common for hair examinations. That is, by focusing up and down on the hair, one can get an idea about the shape of the hair. You can also see it from a stereo binocular examination. You can see the shaft configuration or the shape, but it's not common for us to take a hair off a slide and make a section of it, actual section.
Now, in your direct testimony, you indicated the use of scanning electron microscopy with respect to fibers.
That's correct.
Do you use that technique with respect to hairs?
No, we don't, not routinely.
As compared to fingerprint identification, or foot impression identification, or the identification of projectiles fired by weapons, this is a much more subjective science, is it not?
The courts have never recognized hair examinations as a positive means of identification, and we don't either.
Okay.
And with regards to bullet comparisons, or shoe print comparisons, or fracture comparisons with fingerprints, yes, all those you can make positive associations.
That's right. Is it also fair to say, Mr. Deedrick, based on your experience within the profession, that each of the failed efforts that we just finished discussing was an effort to reach higher on the scale of certainty, to improve on the old technique of comparison by microscope?
That's right.
Okay.
That's correct.
And none of those efforts have ever been accepted within the profession?
No, they really never got accepted at all.
You're still doing what you have always done, pretty much.
We're still relying on the old eyeball. That's
Yes.
right.
Now, do you find that examiners in other facilities which have laboratories similar to yours, at least in some respects, have the same amount of success in periodic testing that your examiners do? Is that a common result, that everybody passes every test?
I don't,
If he knows.
Overruled.
no, I don't know. I don't know what failure rate or success rate these other laboratories have with regards to hairs.
Have you read any studies where it was attempted to be shown that examiners could consistently, independently, come up with similar results?
I don't know if I quite follow that. Maybe you
All
could
right, let me
clarify that.
rephrase.
Yeah.
Everything that is truly a science involves some kind of repeatable phenomenon, correct?
That's correct.
So that if you compare two hairs and say they could have come from the same source, you would expect other examiners to look at the same two hairs without being privy to your opinion and come up with the same result, if they were competent, correct?
That's the idea, right? That's you'd like to see that happen.
Now, my question is, do you know of any studies conducted by responsible laboratories and professionals where that idea has been tested?
Well, the only one I can think of would be the Gaudet study, and there was some independent comparisons done there. I can't recall any others specifically.
Did you read in 1989 in the Journal of Forensic Sciences that you review each month when it relates to your profession, the Wickheiser and Hepworth study?
Names vaguely ring a bell, but I don't recall the study.
Any idea what it was about?
I don't recall.
Do you recall a study where two examiners independently examined over 900 hairs?
No, I don't.
Is it fair to say that if in 1989 that study was published,
Overruled.
is it fair to say that in 1989 you were reading the articles about hair and fiber in the Journal of Forensic Sciences?
I've been reading since 1977, yes.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Bailey, we're going to need to take a break at this point.
Very well, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please remember all my admonitions to you. We'll take one of our mid-afternoon breaks, and remember all my admonitions to you. See you back here in about 15 minutes. All right, Mr. Deedrick, you have to reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Mr. Deedrick, would you resume the witness stand, please? And Mr. Bailey, you may continue with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. By the way, Mr. Deedrick, does any governmental authority, to your knowledge, license examiners of hair and fiber?
I don't believe so.
You don't hold any license in that regard, do you?
I've never heard of that, no.
Okay. During the recess, toward the end, admittedly, did I show you a copy of an article from the Journal of Forensic Sciences?
You did, yes.
Is that one that you've seen before?
I have seen that, yes.
And that, you mentioned a fellow named Gaudet, I believe, with the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Right.
Is that, by the way, the Canadian organization that would be the nearest counterpart to the FBI, which is
Yes, I would.
the Federal Police of Canada?
That's correct.
And they generally reputed to have pretty responsible forensic scientists.
I've only spoken with Mr. Gaudet, and he has done some work with hairs.
But you have read about some of the studies that they've done in an effort to demonstrate the repeatability of one examiner agreeing with another on.
Right, I've read his papers, and I've read papers by Barnett and others refuting what he did.
Well, in this specialty, like any other, the experts are frequently in disagreement with one another, aren't they?
Experts will disagree, yes.
Now, that doesn't often happen when it comes to fingerprints, does it? If he knows.
Sustained.
Is it not true that in the areas we mentioned earlier where identification is possible, positive identification, that experts seldom disagree on a frequent basis, in your experience?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of experience with their distinctive areas. That is, one would expect that if it's a science that is recognized as a means of positive identification, such as comparing striations on bullets or ridges of fingerprints, one would expect them to agree a great deal.
Now, when you were taught at the FBI Academy initially in your class in hair and fibers, were you taught to use a checklist of criteria?
Well, it was a method that was shown to us, and it's something that I used initially.
You used it for a number of years, didn't you?
I did for a while there, and then I decided that it was not really useful.
Can you tell me anything about the checklist you used when you were a neophyte in the specialty?
The checklist is simply a number of microscopic characteristics that might be present in the cuticle, the cortex, and the medulla, and other characteristics about the hair, such as if it's curly or wavy or straight, cross-section, color, racial characteristics. These are just a number of points to remind the new examiner to look at and to check on, just to make sure that you're looking at all the characteristics you should be looking at. And it's an excellent tool, a starting tool for new examiners.
Well, at what point do examiners normally abandon the use of the checklist, in your experience?
Well, we've had examiners that used it all the way through.
That is a somewhat more formal and regulated approach to the comparison process, is it not?
Well, it's again, it's a way to document what you're seeing, and if you feel like that is necessary, then you would do it.
But the position you frequently take, Mr. Deedrick, in these cases is that the breadth of your experience is such that you no longer need the guidance of a checklist. Is that not so?
Well, I don't need it written down on paper. The checklist is pretty much in my head as to what I should look at and pay attention to. And I don't compare checklists, I don't compare notes, I don't compare photographs, I just compare hairs that I actually see in the same field of view.
Are you familiar with the checklist which was urged as proper in the study that we've just discussed by the RCMP?
In the Wickheiser study?
Yeah.
It was a computer data type checklist that they used.
That's not what I'm referring to. Did you see published in the study a checklist which the authors considered to be essential?
Well, I don't recall all of the points in that particular checklist, but I know different studies that have been done have utilized checklists and also computer cards.
Is it not true that some of your colleagues in the profession view the use of these kinds of checklists as mandatory to a valid hair comparison?
Well, some laboratories may require a checklist.
Well, do you consider the RCMP to be a responsible group? Law enforcement?
I believe they are.
All right. You put that up, Mr. Harris, please. Can you bring that down? First, I want to show you the top segment of the table published in that study and ask you whether or not you recognize these as valid characteristics to be looked at when studying hair. In other words, are these some of the things that you look at in an informal way?
Yes, the medullary index is not something that is measured. And again, I believe that this classification system could be incorporated, and maybe the intent is to incorporate it into some type of computerized searching method.
All right. Your Honor, for the record, may this be designated offense 1218?
1218. Mrs. Robertson says 1220.
You see where each of the differing characteristics in each category is given a numerical value or an assigned number in those 7 categories.
Right, I see that, yes.
Okay. Would you agree that unless the numbers match in each of the 7 categories between a known and a questioned hair, that the comparison must be discarded?
I don't believe so.
You
No.
don't?
No, I don't compare or reach conclusion based upon a checklist or,
Okay. Would you illuminate the lower part of the chart? Would you look at what is described as secondary characteristics and tell us whether or not these are things that you look at informally when you do your comparisons?
that's correct. That's pretty much,
Do you see that these different kinds of characteristics within a category are also given numbers?
I do, yes.
Do you understand that one of the authors of the article to which we are referring is the head of the hair and fiber section of the RCMP,
I didn't know that, no.
and that the other one is an examiner like you in the RCMP? Now,
Overruled. Proceed.
do you know that in the study, which is described in this article, that it was suggested that it was mandatory in order to reach a comparison for all of the first 7 groups to match by number, and that there was a second requirement for the secondary group that we are looking at now?
I don't buy that. I mean, I wouldn't agree with that.
And that is that if you vary by more than 1 number in the secondary category, that too would defeat the comparison. Do you agree with that?
No, no.
Do you even look at these things, Mr. Deedrick?
Oh, you look at them and you compare them, yes.
Do you know the results of the 2 examiners used in this study who compared 930 hairs?
I didn't have really a time to really digest just the article.
Would it surprise you that one could compare only 7 pairs and the other 6?
Sustained.
Did you not read this journal article at some point?
I recall reading it. I don't recall. Wasn't able to finish it completely and properly digest it and understand
I mean when
it.
it was published.
Well, I can't remember. I do remember reading it, but I don't recall the contents entirely.
Well, assuming that my suggestion as to what the authors insist are proper criteria is true, that is, that's what the article says, if you had read something with which you disagreed so sharply, wouldn't you remember it?
Well, I disagree with the methodology of employing a numerical value to characteristics such as this methodology is here. We attempted to do the same thing back when the International Hair Symposium was set up in 1985. And the effort was to see if all examiners would characterize a particular hair exactly the same. And there are some differences, where some person might say the pigment granules were medium, one might say fine or fine to medium. So assigning a particular numerical value to the characteristics became a little arbitrary and difficult, at least to computerize, to place a value on an association. But that doesn't mean that 2 examiners who are looking at the same hair would not associate that question hair with the same individual. That doesn't mean that at all. It just means that they based on their experience and what they observe, they see certain characteristics and they make a note of it. And that's one of the difficulties with using this particular methodology, because there may be some variation in the range of experience of the examiners.
And there are advantages to not using this methodology, are there not?
Well, I don't see necessarily an advantage to using it. The only advantage that you may get out of this is that you make sure you look at certain characteristics. But to assign a value so that you could determine if it's a good match or a good association, I don't think that that's something that should be done.
When it comes to the sciences of identification that we discussed, are there not certain minimum requirements before an identification can be asserted within each of the professions, if you know?
And again, are you incorporating all the different areas of forensics such as
What does the
fingerprints?
FBI, excuse me,
I'm sorry. Go
what
ahead.
does the FBI require for fingerprints, minimum points of ID, if you know?
I've spoken with different examiners and gotten different responses on that, so I'm not sure. You might have a person that has 20 years of experience and they may not need 7 points of comparison or 6, whereas a person just starting out, they may require more. I don't know if they have a set number. They may.
If they do, and an examiner came to the stand with less than the set number, that would be a basis for cross-examination, would not meeting a standard.
Yeah, I think if there was a standard set by the group then, and that was below the standard, perhaps it would be subject to some rigorous cross-examination, yes.
Is it not true that departments other than your own advocate the use of lists, checklists of criteria?
They do. I've seen it.
For instance, I think you told me that you have visited the Connecticut State Police.
Well, I haven't visited them. I've worked some cases that they've sent down to me to look at.
Do you read any of their publications on forensic investigation?
I've never seen that, no.
Do we need this up on the screen, especially if it's in the objection, hearsay, under 721 of the Evidence Code?
Are you done with this?
I'm done with that exhibit.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to show you a checklist from this manual and ask you if you agree with its use. Sure.
I think he indicated he hadn't seen it. Mr. Bailey.
Okay, could you put that up, please, Mr. Harris?
I think we have a foundational problem here.
I believe you testified that it is your understanding that other forensic laboratories do advocate the use of formal checklists in evaluating hair.
Right, I am aware that other labs will use checklists.
And I just showed you one of those from the Wickenheiser study from the Canadians, and I'd like to show you one used by the Connecticut State Police.
May I ask if the witness be shown before it's put on the screen, Your Honor?
Yes. We have a foundational problem here, counsel. Take it down.
May I show them in the book?
You may.
Showing you a book called Physical Evidence, published by Dr. Henry Lee and others under the aegis of some organization, I guess the Connecticut State Police. I refer to you to page 143 and see if you recognize that as a checklist used by some examiners.
That looks like a checklist.
Okay. Are you familiar with all of the criteria that you just saw on the list?
I don't think I gave it that much time and attention that all of the things went into my brain at once,
Would you be
but
willing to go through it with me and see which ones you use?
I would be glad to.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
May we put it up, John?
Your Honor, it's been a foundation.
All right, sidebar with court reporter, please. All right, Mr. Deedrick, if you would, just take a moment and review the categories that are listed on Table 14 there. And let us know if, after you've reviewed it, and if those terminologies or characteristics are familiar to you.
Okay, with regards to scale pattern,
Before we start, may we put it up so people can see what you're talking about?
yeah, let's do that.
Go ahead.
All right, you're familiar with the terminology there, Mr. Deedrick?
I've seen all those words before, yes.
Thank you.
Defense 1221, Your Honor.
So marked.
Okay, you have the book in front of you. You can also see on your screen that we have faithfully reproduced it. You agree with that?
It looks the same to me, yes.
Okay. Now, there are some words on there which are just plain English words, and some which may be peculiar to what you do. Would you, for instance, explain to the jury what the word imbricate means?
Well, an imbricate is the common scale pattern that's found in human hairs. It's very irregular. It doesn't have any particular regular shape to it, whereas coronal scales, they're really only found in infants, very young infants, just newborns. And as to adults, you don't see coronal scales hardly at all, except in very fine hairs, and those are not even considered for comparison. Spinous scales are not commonly associated to human hairs.
You mean fibrous?
No, spinous scale patterns with human hairs. Generally,
Are you reading from item 1?
item number, scale pattern, that's number, right, that's,
Well, there seems to be a terminology difference between what you have up there and what we have as Table 14.
yeah,
Counsel.
there's a little difference.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right, well, go ahead and comment on spinous. That's not common to humans, is it?
No, spinous scales are commonly found in mink hairs, they're found in dog hairs, and some other animal hairs, but they're not common for humans.
The definition of the word imbricate, Mr. Deedrick, means laying one over the other like the leaves of an artichoke, right?
Right, that's right. Or they lay like the shingles on a roof, but they're very irregular. Instead of smooth, they're choppy looking, and they're not very uniform.
Okay, now, within the category of imbricate, which applies to all human hairs, adult human hairs, do you find differences that help you in your comparison studies?
Generally, imbricate is a term that's used just in general for human hair scale characteristics.
The point is, within that term, which encompasses a description of all adult human hairs, there are no further divisions recognized in your profession, are there? Any other terms?
I wouldn't recognize necessarily, although there probably have been some people over the years that have tried to break that down too, but I think imbricate is just one large group.
Dr. Kirk tried to do that in his study, and it didn't work, right?
Well, again, Hausman did it, and a few others did it as well, trying to break down scale patterns to I don't know how many different groups. But with humans, we generally refer to the scale pattern on humans as imbricate.
Right. Okay. So that is not basically, except as between humans and animals or humans and infants, it is not a basis of differentiation.
No,
Everybody's imbricate, right?
pretty much so, yes.
But in the next category, the medulla, is that the same as in your book, number 2?
It's the same, yes.
That is a very useful basis, much of the time, in differentiation, is it not?
It can be, yes.
One of the first things you look for when you get to your microscope, the existence or absence and type or nature of the medulla.
You do see that. It's readily apparent.
And that is the dark line in the center of the cortex that you pointed out to us in a number of the exploded views that you showed on your cards. True?
Right, that's correct.
And do you, when you examine hairs, look to categorize the medulla as is done on line 2? Or do you have other and further things that you look for to differentiate?
Sometimes I'll use the term trace as opposed to fragmented.
All right. And tell the jury what you mean when you say there is a trace of a medulla.
Well, the tissue that's found in the center, it's a little bit different than the rest of the hair. It's made up of a little different type of keratin, which is the protein that makes up hair. Maybe in just small dots or just real short links, and it could be black, which has air surrounding it, or it might be clear. So you could have a trace clear, trace dark, or you could call it fragmented. It just depends on what you like.
Okay. But it's indicated there that in some hairs there is no medulla. It's
Right,
absent.
and there's some argument on that too.
All right. Well, have you seen hairs where you weren't able to locate any medulla?
Well, I have.
Okay. You mean some people disagree with you that it can be absent?
Some people say that it's there, but you just don't see it. Well, if I don't see it, then it's not there.
All right. Now, the medulla pattern, as distinguished from the medulla itself, could you look at those terms and tell me whether or not you recognize those as valid bases of definition?
Well, I don't, let me check to see if the two lists are the same. Okay, I don't. Some of these terms are not used for human hairs. Uniserial, multiserial, vacuolated, and lattice, they are not common terms used for human hairs. Those are common terms used for animal hairs. Uniserial and multiserial are common in the rabbit group. Vacuolated hairs you may be found in the rodents as well as other animals. Lattice medullas are found in the deer family. Amorphous, that's common for humans. Most of human hairs are amorphous, either amorphous dark, amorphous clear, or they may be cellular. And it apparently doesn't have cellular there. And I've even found one that I call a wafer, which is unusual.
Okay. So these would be divisions, if they appeared on this list, within amorphous, the only category applied to human hairs that you see.
Well, amorphous and cellular or bulbous, those are the two major categories.
For the benefit of the uninitiated, would you define the word vacuolated?
Well, vacuolated again is just amorphous is no form. It has no particular form. Vacuolated, it looks like large vacuoles or large chambers that you see in the center of the hair.
Air pockets?
They could be, yes. Air pocket's a good example of that. With uniserial and multiserial, uniserial means just like a bead, a long string of clear or dark medullary material. And in rabbits have very fine hairs which have uniserial medullas. And in the larger hairs, they're called multiserial, and it looks like corn. You had a piece of corn cob or something? All the medulla looks like that. It looks like kernels of corn.
Mr. Deedrick, in your direct testimony, you made reference to diameter as having some importance in several respects.
Right. It can have it can play a role in the comparison.
All right. Well, first of all, the amount of diameter may be helpful in determining race, correct?
Yes.
The thicker hairs being Asian, generally speaking.
Generally speaking, that's right.
Okay. The constancy of the diameter from the proximal end or root to the distal end or tip can be significant in making comparisons. Is that true?
It can be, yes.
And is that something that you would note when you were examining hairs under the comparison microscope?
I would make a note of that as to how variable the diameter is along the length.
Okay. The length of the hair, what significance might that have?
Well, the length of the hair plays a role in the comparison. They don't always have the same length in the question hair as the known hairs, but it's something you must consider.
Is there a minimum length with which you need to work before you can call a comparison as simple?
I don't believe there's a set length. It depends on the characteristics of the hair.
What's the smallest fragment that you've worked with in obtaining what you viewed as a positive result?
I believe I've gone down to maybe 1/8 of an inch or so,
Eighth of an inch?
about 1/8 of an inch.
Okay. Incidentally, on Friday, you did a calculation for us and said that if you magnified a 12-inch hair from Nicole Brown Simpson 250 times, you would have a picture 25 feet long. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah.
Would you like
I
to
believe-
recalculate it?
Well, I'm not a mathematician. What does it come out to be?
Well, 10 times 250 would be 250 feet long, wouldn't it, if you start with the 12-inch piece?
Okay, well, that sounds okay. It's pretty big, I know.
Okay. In any event, the color of the hair, you always take into account, I take it. And you talked about that on your direct examination.
Right, that's correct.
And you always, as well, take into account what is called the reflectivity. First of all, do you use that term, reflectivity, for that category?
No.
Well, do you distinguish between opaque, translucent, transparent, and clear hairs?
No, if it's opaque, it's one thing, but the other qualities are not commonly referred to in the descriptive notes.
All right. So apparently, some examiners feel there is a distinction between the latter three, and you do not. Is that a fair statement?
That's not something we've ever taught, nor have I've even heard.
At the FBI Academy?
Well, I talk to a lot of hair examiners around the country, but I've never seen those.
Okay. This is a first for you, coming out of the Connecticut State Police?
Well, if that's where it came from, it's a first to me, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, you said you knew who Henry Lee was, and you do know he heads their
think-
laboratory.
Yeah, I think we probably all heard about Henry Lee.
Okay. As to the tip, do you agree with those categories published there as differentiated?
That looks fine.
Okay. And what about the root? Are those different categories that you inspect in trying to identify or distinguish unlike hairs?
I don't know what a normal root is, the word normal. Stretched, I might refer to hair that's been forcibly removed, and I may indicate that it either has tissue or no tissue. If it's absent, I'll make a note of that. Follicular, that may be referring to there's tissue present. Bulbous and germ, I have an idea where he's going with that, but I may make a special note of it if there are some characteristics that, in my experience, are unique as to the root.
Does it not appear that absent is the contrary of the other five categories?
Well, yeah, it's right. If it's not there, the other five don't apply.
Okay. As to the cross-section, I believe you told us that race can be indicated by a cross-section of hair.
Right. It's one of the characteristics that can be applied to racial determination.
Okay. And the pigment. I think you talked about a number of things referencing pigment. First of all, if the pigment is absent, what color is the hair?
Well, it would be gray, white.
That is a transition you have accomplished in the past few years.
Yeah, I might have. I have a few pigment granules left in there, believe it or not, but yeah, most of them are turning that way.
A product, no doubt, of cross-examination.
Yeah, well, I think it started when I got this case, right?
What is granular pigment? Have you ever noticed pigment that you would call granular?
I have, yes. Sometimes in hairs, when you're looking at them microscopically, it looks like there's sand grains in it. They're just very present, very obvious. They're not grouped in any particular clump or chain or patch, but they just look sandy. That's what I would call granular.
Okay. And chain, clump, dense, and opaque are also terms that you would use in describing different kinds of hair.
I might, yes.
Have you in the past?
I do comment on pigment density,
Okay.
yes, whether it's clumping or streaking, Chaining, I generally refer to streaking in that category as opposed to chaining, although some
They
of them,
essentially mean the same, don't they?
pretty much the same.
Right. Okay. Cortical fusi is something that you mentioned you look for. My question is, do you agree with the differentiation set forth there, 6 categories, as being distinct from one another?
Okay, you're referring to the four areas, right? The
I'm sorry,
absent,
I'm one line above you, both beginning with absent. The 4 categories.
4 categories. Absent, few, bunched. Yes, generally I refer to the size, shape, and distribution of them.
So these are things that you would note at the comparison microscope, both as to the K and the Q hair that you're looking at.
I would do that, yes.
Okay. Now, distinguish, if you will, the cortical pigment from the pigment number 12.
I'm sorry, the cortical pigment as opposed to pigment.
15 as opposed to 12. What are the differences in the 2 kinds of pigment? The cortex is, of course, the center body of the hair, is it not? The main body.
Oh, okay. Well, pretty much all the pigments located in the cortex. I think they're referring to here on pigment distribution, which is centrally located, which you will find in red-haired individuals, peripherally located, which is located out more towards the cuticle, to one side, which we've already discussed, and the pigment is found more down towards the root of the hair, and I don't know if I see that so much. Most of the time what you see is the pigment might be out towards the tip because the hair is starting to gray a little bit, and it starts graying from the bottom up, so I don't know about that root.
Okay. Cosmetic treatment, you see a lot, don't you?
No, not really. I mean, you see it because we see a lot of hairs, but that's significant when you see cosmetic treatment.
Well, there was some in this case, wasn't
There was.
there? You remember
yes.
which hairs had been cosmetically treated?
Yes, I do.
And whose were those?
Nicole Brown's were treated. There were some question hairs that were treated.
Okay. Were those question hairs, the hairs in the cap that you deemed to be not similar to those of Mr. Simpson?
Right, and also there was one that on Q15, which was from the cap, that was appeared to be dissimilar to any of the knowns.
Can you tell the jury what you noted about those 6 hairs dissimilar to Mr. Simpson hair that caused you to use the word treated in describing them?
Well, not all of the 6 were treated. There were at least 3, maybe 4 hair fragments that appeared reddish brown, and they appear to be treated. Really not the greatest hairs to compare, but the fact that they were treated led me to believe that they couldn't have originated from that individual.
Now, you examined quite a number of K hairs that were known to be pulled from Mr. Simpson, right?
I did, yes.
Did most of those have some part of the follicle or tissue with them? The ones that were forcibly removed rather than being combed?
Right, I would think most of them had a root in some form.
Did you get any combed hairs taken from Mr. Simpson?
I did.
And what about the 2 victims? Did you have any combed hairs from them?
No.
All right. Did you find any evidence of treatment on any of the K7 hairs that came from Mr. Simpson's head?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Did you make any inquiry directly or through the investigators here in Los Angeles as to the history of Mr. Simpson's care of his hair through his barber or whomever to see whether any treatment had ever been applied?
I don't believe I ever asked that.
You have no information in that respect?
No, I have no way of knowing that.
Okay. Now, damaged hair. Cut, crunched, broken, and burned. I think 3 of those terms are pretty obvious. Tell us what is meant in your specialty by crunched.
Well, that would be an indication of where the hair may have had made impact with a solid object. Could be a hammer, could be a mallet, it could be an axe, it could be a window, like a windshield. But that may indicate that the hair has been crushed in some form. It's difficult. Actually, it's pretty difficult to crush a hair. So when you see a crushed hair, there's been some pretty heavy hitting on it.
Well, you've testified in the past that you've seen hairs that were crushed by a blunt instrument
I have.
striking it, right?
I have.
And do you not suspect that if I were mean enough to take a hammer and hit Miss Clark on the head hard enough to knock her out, that you'd find a couple of crushed hairs?
Well, I think the chances would be improved greatly.
Did anybody ever submit to you any hairs from Nicole Brown Simpson for your examination as to whether or not they had been crushed?
I didn't observe that at all.
Were any submitted to you that were associated in their submission with some kind of alleged blow to the head?
I don't believe any of the hairs that I found, either questioned or known, exhibited that crushed characteristic.
Has there been explained to you in the preparation for your testimony the theory advanced in this court as to how Miss Simpson was felled and then slain?
I've heard a few different ideas, and that perhaps is one of them.
You've heard the theory of the medical examiner, have you?
Well, yes, indirectly. I did hear that she may have been hit on the head.
Okay. When was the first time you ever heard that theory, Mr. Deedrick?
It may have been during the testimony during the case. Someone may have mentioned it, or I had overheard it.
Nobody ever mentioned it to you when you were working on the hairs, did they?
No, I try to stay away from theories when you're working the hairs up.
Well, Miss Brockbank came out to see you with a bunch of exhibits in August. Did she tell you anything about the victim having been hit on the head?
No.
Did anyone else tell you before you heard it on the news?
I don't believe so. No, I don't recall anybody saying that to me, but it really didn't matter to me. I mean, I didn't see any evidence of that, and so I couldn't support it one way or another.
Well, no hairs were submitted to you allegedly from a specific spot on the top of her head accompanying an injury, were they?
No, I don't even know if the hairs came from an injured area.
Okay. We can skip, I think, race, since you've covered that, except I would like to ask you about a mixed, what do you mean by mixed? A mixture of one of the two or more of the first three?
Okay, yes, right. You may find that hairs exhibit characteristics that are shared by the models. All right, if the person exhibits a very large diameter hair, it has a reddish coloration, yet it has a lot of buckling and perhaps clumping of the pigment, that might tend to indicate it might be an Asian black mix. Sometimes you find that the hairs will exhibit microscopic characteristics that share a couple racial groups. And that you might say that those were exhibit mixed racial characteristics.
Is that something you look for when you're making your examination?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I believe you have said that this is still the current booklet, I assume passed out to students of hair and fiber when you teach.
We still hand that out, yes.
Okay. And have you reviewed it recently?
Well, I don't know how long ago it was, but I have one in my office.
Do you teach from it?
Not really. Not really. It's mainly an introductory type manual for beginners, and it's they find it useful because it has some pictures in it, but we just try to use it as a supplement to our normal teaching course.
All right, well, we'll get to pictures in a little while, but is it not a fact that when young examiners come out of the academy and are assigned to your section for the year of training that you described in your direct examination, that they are generally encouraged to use a checklist in examining hairs, such as is contained in the teachings of this book?
I normally recommend for all new people, when they're just starting to learn it, and I start this day one, not after the year, that it might be helpful if they get a checklist so that they can make sure they're touching base with the characteristics that are important and that you're going to evaluate when you're comparing hairs. After the year, I don't care if they use the checklist. If they want to, fine. If they don't, that's their business.
All right. Would you just take a quick look at the list that is derived from this booklet over several pages and see whether or not it's something that you teach at the FBI? these appear to be a number of the same terms that we looked at on the list published in the manual by the Connecticut State Police. Your Honor. Court, please.
1222.
Is that the whole thing?
This is not the exactly.
Clark, you could give that to Mrs. Robertson. We could make a copy so the witness wouldn't have to try to read it off the screen. Monitor's working, but I mean, it's not the easiest thing to read all the time. Yes, Mrs. Robertson.